All right, so I have a question for you guys. Have you ever noticed how you can eat all your meals on one day and feel totally stuffed and satisfied, but then just a few days later, you could eat the exact same amount of calories. It seems like it's, exactly what you were eating on other days, but you just cannot stop eating. You're like ravenously hungry. You want to eat your arm off. What gives? Like, why is it that, this kind of thing happens? If this is something that you've experienced in the past or you currently experience, go ahead and put a one in the chat box right now. And again, it's just this idea that, some days you are satisfied and you seem to eat just the right amount. And then other days, even though you're eating the same amount of calories, you just cannot stop eating. All right. So go ahead and put that one in the chat box right now if that applies to you. Okay. Now, okay, so it definitely looks like some people have experienced this. Okay, great. All right, so now what I want you to kind of think about with me today in this kind of presentation here um, is to kind of understand that when it comes to satiety or fullness or satisfaction, which is super important when we want to try to lose weight, obviously, and get into a healthy place and a healthy body weight, that calories do not necessarily equal satiety. In other words, I could give you 5,000 calories, let's say, and just because that's a large number, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make you feel full and satisfied and want to eat less. On the other hand, I might be able to give you a lot less calories, let's say maybe only 1,000 calories, and yet you could be absolutely stuffed and full. And that's because it's not necessarily the calories or the energy. Let's say calories is sort of just another name for energy or the energy that's in food. It's not necessarily the energy that's in the food that's necessarily making you feel full and satisfied. It is a component, but it's not necessarily the only component or even maybe the most important component when it comes to how much we eat. In fact, we now know there's plenty of research showing that there are certain kinds of foods that actually stimulate our hunger and cravings and can actually cause us to want to overeat or eat too much, whereas other foods can suppress our hunger and increase our satiety, making us feel more full. So we really want to understand that when it comes to what we eat, it's not just about the quantity of the food, but the quality of the food. Now, there are many factors that can affect what we eat. And some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with these. So we have things like some days we're just more active than others, so we're going to probably feel like eating a bit more. Some days our stress is higher. Some days we are drinking less water, and boredom, social pressures. We have friends and stuff who are trying to sort of hey, you can eat this. You've been on a diet or eating this way for a while, so you can eat this thing. Medical issues, whether someone's having their period or they're on a medication or there's a hormone issue. These can influence our appetite in certain ways, hormonal fluctuations, and so on. So there are definitely a lot of factors that can impact how much we eat. But one of the biggest ones, which I just kind of already touched on, it has to do with the quality of our food. Remember that we've talked about with this nutrition hierarchy. Yuri's talked about this in the Kajabi videos, and coaches have talked with you about this. That there is a hierarchy when it comes to the nutrition. In that, number one, if we don't reduce the quantity of how much we eat, how many calories we eat, then we eat too much. Even if we're eating really healthy foods, we're still going to gain weight. We have to eat the appropriate amount or quantity of food. But the second element in the hierarchy is the quality of the food. And there are a lot of different ways we could define quality. Uh, you know, whether how it's been processed, but generally speaking, minimally processed whole foods are going to be a higher quality than those that are highly processed. So think like a potato versus a potato chip, right? Or an olive even versus olive oil, and so on. uh, we have corn versus corn syrup, right? So these whole foods are going to be much healthier and much better, quote unquote, quality than the processed foods. Now, frequency, we're not going to really touch on today, but that's a whole nother element we'll explore later. That has a little bit more to do with the timing of when we eat certain foods and how often we're eating throughout the day and the impact that has on health and weight loss. So anyways, when it comes to quality of the food, we want to kind of look at what I call three amazing tales and how they would relate to us and our journey to reach our ideal goal weight and maintain it as well. So what we're going to look at here in this presentation is how poor quality food affects our appetite in a negative way. We're going to look at this in, like I said, at least 3 different examples and through 3 kind of interesting stories. And these 3 stories, the first one we'll look at is how do you make a fat rat? Story number 2 is how do you gain 5 pounds in 7 days? And story number 3, how to eat less by eating more. All right, so let's jump right into these 3 stories and see how this will be applicable to us. So as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to weight loss or fat loss more specifically, one of the things that we really want to watch out for is hunger, right? We don't want to be when I say hunger, I'm talking like excessive hunger. Having hunger like time to time throughout the day is actually a good thing. We want to experience brief bouts of hunger throughout the day. That's a good sign that we're actually turning to our own fat for energy. So I've oftentimes said that if someone is telling me that they're never hungry, then I'm usually right off the bat saying, okay, well, that might be part of why we're not losing any weight, because we should experience a little bit of hunger throughout the day from time to time. Now, that being said, excessive hunger, there's even a term for this, sometimes referred to by scientists as polyphagia or hyperphagia, is excessive hunger or increased appetite. And it means that we're essentially just ravenously hungry, like we're starving and it's like nothing can satisfy. This is the type of hunger that we really want to watch out for. So obviously we don't want to do anything that is going to cause this. And yes, as we're going to see, there are things that we can do with our food and our lifestyle that can actually cause us, without even knowing we're doing it, to become excessively hungry. So let's turn to our first story to see how this kind of happens, or at least one of the ways that it happens. And that is the story of how do you make an obese rat. Now, this is actually, believe it or not, this is actually a true story, and this has to do with research that was done going all the way back to the 1970s. And what researchers were essentially trying to do is experimenting with animals to find out how do you make animals gain body fat quickly, and then to see how applicable this would be to humans. All right, so if it makes a rat fat very quickly, then let's see if we would get the same effect when it comes to people. Now, initially, when these scientists were studying these animals, it actually was kind of challenging to make animals obese. When you try to just feed an animal its normal food and just get it to eat extra, most animals just simply don't eat that much extra food. So researchers had to turn to specific kinds of foods or quality foods to get these animals to overeat. So they may give them a higher fat diet or they give them a higher sugar diet. But when you just give them standard, in this case, rat chow, the animals just, most of them at least, just don't overeat to the point that they become obese. You need to change the quality of the food, not just give the animal more quantity of food. Remember, when they had more quantity, they just simply wouldn't eat it. So in 1976, this researcher by the name of Anthony Sclafani, he tried something new and very simple. And he happened to just sort of discover this almost by accident. He noticed that when he tried to give the animals just kind of extra rat chow, it just wasn't very effective. And even when he gave them a high fat diet or a high sugar diet, it still wasn't promoting rapid fat gain in the way that they were trying to achieve. So he noticed one day that when he would drop little pieces of food like chocolate or Fruit Loops or peanut butter, or just kind of little things that he would have lying around the lab, that these animals would gorge on this stuff. And it was almost as though they started acting almost like starving animals. They started gorging on this food and acting very strange, sometimes even shaking. They were acting like they were, like I said, starving animals. This ended up leading Sclafani to discover that when you mix fats, salts, and sugars together, not just giving them in isolation, but mix them together, you get animals to just start binging on food. It's as though you trigger something in their brain that causes them to overeat and to put on weight rapidly. As a result of Sclafani's experiments, his diet later became called or renamed the cafeteria diet. And today, by scientists, it still remains the most rapid and effective way of producing dietary obesity and metabolic syndrome, not only in rodents, but we'll see also in people. This study here says the cafeteria diet is a robust model of human metabolic syndrome with liver and adipose inflammation in comparison to a high fat diet. So here essentially they're saying that giving people or animals a high fat diet just does not produce the same degree of obesity as giving them a blended diet that has a lot of processed foods in it. So cookies, chips, processed meats, many of these same types of things they feed to these animals. They find that not only does body weight increase dramatically, but it is something that's like, as we'll see here in a second, applicable to humans as well. Here's one more study entitled Energy Density in the Cafeteria Diet Induced Hyperphagia in the Animal. So think about this. They're giving animals high calorie processed foods, and the animals literally become hyperphagic. Remember that word hyperphagia, excessive hunger. So meaning that when you fed the animal these processed foods, they actually started acting like starving animals. So think about that. Imagine if you're eating something and the very food that you're eating is actually leading you to feel ravenously hungry rather than satisfying. So remember, it's not just the calories that are in the food, but the quality or the kind of food that we're eating that can impact our hunger and appetite and satiety levels. It says here, similar to human studies, exposure to the cafeteria diet resulted in a 58% increase in energy intake. So meaning that when people were fed these processed foods, they would eat up to almost 60% more calories than normal, than what they should be. The cafeteria diet, as I said, is there are hundreds and hundreds of studies in humans and animals showing that when you simply change the kind of food, the quality of the food, you can cause rapid weight gain in both humans and animals. Whereas when you improve the quality, you have the animals or the people eat natural whole foods, there's oftentimes a rapid reduction in body weight and or at the very least eating normal amounts of food. Let's look at just one of these human studies, and this actually leads us to story number 2. How do you gain 5 pounds in 7 days? All right, so in this particular human study, these researchers actually set up a very interesting experiment to see or to test the impact of the cafeteria diet on normal, healthy, lean volunteers, in this case, 10 healthy, lean men. Now, in this particular experiment, what they did is they set up this automated food selection system. So they had these 2 giant vending machines that were filled with a variety of foods. They had, things like you can see here, English muffins, French toast, pancakes with syrup, scrambled eggs, chicken pies, cheeseburgers, margarine, white sugar, cakes and puddings, and so on. So you can see things like chips and chocolate and so on, and a couple other sort of just normal foods, like a banana and, things like this. So the idea was giving them essentially the same kinds of foods that they found in animals promote rapid weight gain. Now, these guys were not under any pressure to try to overeat or told to overeat. They were not, as far as they were concerned, they didn't even know they were really in a food experiment. They were just told that whenever you're hungry, you go over and you pick from the vending machine what you'd like to eat. Now, these men previously had been eating, a typical average amount of calories so that they stayed weight stable. But when turned loose on these vending machines, they spontaneously, without even realizing they were doing it, began to consume an excess of about 1,544 calories above what they actually needed. In fact, this almost lines up perfectly with what we see in animal research, because this equated to about a 60% increase in food intake over the course of the time that they were in this experiment, which was in this case over 7 days. And in that 7 days, the volunteers gained on average, so that means some gained more, some a little bit less, about 5.1 pounds. So this is crazy when you think about it, that research in humans lining up almost exactly what we see in animals when exposed to highly processed foods. A study published by NIH. This is entitled "Study Finds Heavily Processed Foods Cause Overeating and Weight Gain." So literally, the food itself causes people to eat more calories and to gain weight. Now, what was really interesting about this study was that in this group they gave people both the same number of calories and macros. So they were getting the same fat, protein, and carb content. But the only difference is that one group got it highly processed and the other group got it more whole food or more natural food. And yet the processed meals still cause more weight gain than the whole foods. So something is definitely going on here. Now, for those who are wondering, I know when I first heard about this, I was like, well, why though? What is it about this cafeteria diet? I mean, obviously these foods are high in calories and fat and salt and sugar, but but why is it that it makes them actually feel like or act like they're starving? Something has to be going on here. These animals not only get very hungry, but they also get very tired. So they don't really feel like exercising very much. They don't feel like, moving very much. So if we really want to understand what's going on here, we'd have to kind of look a little bit deeper. Now, that's a little bit outside the scope of this presentation, but I do want to touch on it briefly because we do have a lot of good research now showing kind of what's going on. To summarize, and again, like I said, we don't have time to look at this a lot, but I do want to go through a little bit. We can see that low quality foods or processed foods, there are several reasons, and there may be even more, that these can lead to weight gain. One is that processed foods are very pro-inflammatory, and they negatively affect the areas of the brain that control our appetite. So yet many people don't know this, but your brain is actually what is supposed to control how much food we eat. And the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is responsible not only for how much we drink, but also how much we eat. And anything that negatively affects this region of our brain can impact how much we eat. And now we know that pro-inflammatory compounds in foods actually affect the receptors in the hypothalamus that can lead us to overeat. And so this is something we really want to avoid if possible. Processed foods have also been found in many studies to actually be very addictive and can trigger overeating. Processed foods also not only are high in inflammatory compounds, but they're low in anti-inflammatory ones. So remember, when it comes to fighting inflammation, it's not just a matter of eating, or avoiding, high inflammatory foods, but we need to make sure we're consuming things like polyphenols, antioxidants, flavonols, prebiotics, fiber, and these are found primarily in whole foods. Processed foods are also more calorie dense. We'll look at this a bit later, and easier to overeat. Processed foods are often much lower in protein and tend to be higher in fat, salt, and sugar. So that could also be an issue there. Processed foods are usually higher glycemic, so they have more negative impact on our blood sugar and insulin levels. And processed foods negatively impact hormones that are known to regulate our appetite, like insulin, ghrelin, leptin, neuropeptide Y, CCK, and many other hormones. So a lot of reasons why these processed foods lead to weight gain. Now, just to kind of reinforce this here, we can look at this study here, for example, looked at low-grade inflammation and relate to overweight and obesity. And we can see that it says it's not only a characteristic of the obese state, but fat tissue itself is very pro-inflammatory. So the more fat you have in your body, the more inflammatory markers you produce, or the more inflammatory molecules you produce, compared to, say, lean people. Blood concentrations of inflammatory markers are lowered after weight loss. And we can see that even after the consumption of one meal, that these inflammatory mediators in the bloodstream are exaggerated or increase when meals are high in fat and sugar and, basically processed foods. However, on the opposite side, we can see that these uh, um, these inflammatory mediators or markers can be reduced when we consume foods that are high in certain antioxidants and or can be minimized. And these types of foods the researchers mention here come from a healthy diet that includes whole grains, vegetables, fruits, fish, things like this that are all associated with lower inflammation levels. When it comes to the health benefits of these different foods or these anti-inflammatory substances, some researchers have went so far to even rate foods based upon their nutrient density. So this is a little different than calorie density. Now we're looking at nutrient density, and in this case, we're not looking at like energy, but things like fiber, polyphenols, phytonutrients, things like that. And so you can see that they give them a score. The higher the score, the more nutrient dense it is. So these would be great foods to consume on a regular basis to help reduce inflammation. So you can see things on the left-hand side, for example, we have like kale, collards, bok choy, spinach, broccoli. You can see that the top foods tend to be these dark leafy greens. So we really want to make sure we're including those on a regular basis. But, we have things like strawberries, pomegranate, tomato, blueberry. In the middle are still really good. You can see things like beans, sunflower seeds, and so on. And if we go all the way to the far right side, you can see that when you get down to things like ice cream and cheese and yogurt and things like this, they tend to be very, very low when it comes to overall nutrient density. So we'd want to minimize those a bit more. Now, another study here looking at entitled Obesity and the Role of Adipose Tissue in Inflammation and Metabolism. And here they mention this hormone leptin, which we now know is a huge part of regulating our appetite and our body weight. And it tends to be messed up and dysfunctional when we eat diets that are very pro-inflammatory. In fact, researchers now believe that resistance to leptin appears to be the chief cause of obesity, meaning that almost anything we do that messes up this hormone will lead to weight gain. And one of the biggest things we now know that messes up leptin is things that mess with the brain's ability to communicate with our fat cells. And this tends to be things that are very pro-inflammatory things that we consume, processed foods. Another thing we could look at is studies done on the addictive properties of food. So yes, believe it or not, certain foods are going to be far more addictive than others and can lead us to want to overeat them without even realizing we're doing it. If you think you know what the most addictive food is, put your answer in the chat box, whatever, or maybe it's specific to you. What would be the food that you think would be the most addictive for you, the one that you have the most difficult time trying to not overeat? All right, so go ahead and put your answer in the chat box, and then we'll look at what did the researchers find, because the researchers actually, this is a study done out of the University of Michigan, and let's just jump right to what the researchers found. So yes, pizza. I don't know about you guys, but I love pizza. And you can see here that according to the researchers, that of all the foods that they rated, as far as from most addictive down to least addictive, the pizza was found to be the number one most addictive food of all. And they went into all the different reasons why, and part of it is because we know that there are drugs of addiction. But many people are not aware that many foods contain these same kinds of properties. For example, many people may not know this, but Coca-Cola. Let's think about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, when it was first created, was actually created by a man who was himself a morphine addict who took two compounds, caffeine from the cola nut and cocaine from the coca leaf that he had discovered, and he created this quote unquote elixir that contained two very addictive properties. And now this was later banned, so I think now it's the Stefan company that is the only company that can essentially extract the coca from these leaves. But the point is that this has been, food has been for years been developed by psychologists and food experts to make it as tasty and as addictive as possible. There's a book, by the way, if you ever want to check it out, called The End of Overeating by Dr. David Kessler, the former commissioner of the FDA, who talks about how many foods contain these pharmacokinetic properties, which are essentially drug-like properties that causes a rapid absorption, causes there to be the excretion of certain chemicals and hormones that are very similar to those of addictive drugs. Here is a list. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to kind of read some of these off for you. But here's the list that the researchers came up with. And as far as the most addictive foods down to some of the least addictive foods. And now in this particular list, you can see that pizza rates at number 4, which was a little bit different in this particular survey. Chocolate actually came out number 1, ice cream number 2, French fries number 3, pizza number 4, cookies number 5, chips number 6, and then it went down the list from there: cake, popcorn, cheeseburgers, muffin, breakfast cereals, gummy candy, fried chicken, soda, rolls, cheese, pretzels, bacon, crackers, nuts, steak. Now when we get to steak and granola bars, so you can see that steak was actually rated a little bit higher, strangely enough, than even a granola bar. We start to enter into more of the lower or least addictive foods. So like let's make this a little bit bigger here. And you can see here these are the top addictive foods. These are the ones that we know these foods, if we're consuming them on a regular part of our diet, that these are things we're eating every day, it's going to be pretty darn hard to stick to our meal plan. I would predict. And that's because, again, these foods are very difficult to control how much we eat because of their addictive properties. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the bottom portion of the list here, we can see that this is where the least addictive foods, and again, let's make this a little bit bigger. These kinds of foods, things like you have chicken, strawberries, apples, corn with no butter or salt, salmon, banana, carrots, brown rice, and so on. you can see these are like actually great weight loss foods. They're very, very filling, very high in fiber, high in nutrients. And we can start to see that these are some great foods that we can mix and match to make some really good meals. So for example, we had some brown rice with some salmon and maybe some cooked carrots, or you could do like a strawberry dessert. There's so many different things that you can make with many of these kinds of foods. Another study that we could look at that gives us some insights into the same kind of phenomena, it has to do with the satiety index. Now, the satiety index is another study published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition that was essentially looking at how well a food could make you feel full when calories remain equal. So and for how long. So what they did is they gave in this study each serving of food was about 240 calories. People had to eat the food, and then they had to basically every 15, 30, 45, an hour, and so on out, they had to keep rating their level of fullness and satiety and to see how long it would take them before they felt hungry again. So in this case, all of the servings were the exact same number of calories, and to take away some of the stimulus that can sometimes mess with these studies, such as temperature of the food or even visually. If it looks like you're eating a lot of food, you might feel more full than if it looks like a little portion. What they did is they served all the foods at the same temperature, and subjects had to eat under a hood. So, meaning they couldn't even really see what it is they were eating very well. They had to, so to speak, eat in the dark and eat all of their calories and then rate their levels of fullness and satiety. These are just some of the foods. So you can see here we have oatmeal, yogurt, jelly beans. Now, what they did with these foods is they gave them a score. And how they did this was they said, let's use bread, like white bread, as a baseline. So anything that scores higher than bread, as far as it makes you feel fuller than bread, we're going to give it a higher score. And if it scores less than white bread, we're going to give it a lower score. So they just gave white bread kind of arbitrarily. They said, let's just give white bread a score of 100. So anything higher than 100 is better than white bread at making you feel full. And anything that scores lower than white bread is going to be much worse. So if you had to rate these foods here, go ahead and just kind of do it yourself. If you want to put in the chat box what you think the score would be, or what, maybe not the score, but even say, what do you think would make you feel the most full the longest? We have a bowl of oatmeal, a bowl of yogurt. We don't know much about what kind of yogurt, if this is probably a sweetened yogurt. And then we have jelly beans. So go ahead and rate those as far as maybe why don't we put down, yeah, which food do you think would be the most filling? And then let's look at our next slide here. We have orange, ice cream, and steak. Now remember, this is the same amount of calories, so don't look at the picture per se to determine, but if you had 240 calories of orange, 240 calories of ice cream, or 240 calories of steak, which one would make you feel fuller longer? And then our third example here, we have a potato, egg, and a croissant. So again, 240 calories of each. Which one would you rate highest? All right? And go ahead and you can just enter those in the chat box. So now let's look at our foods here. We have, let's go back to our original example. We have oatmeal, yogurt, and jelly beans. Remember, if it scores higher than 100, that's better. If it scores less than 100, it's worse than white bread. So let's see what the researchers found. Yogurt got a score of 88. Now that's kind of interesting, right? That's surprising. It was, again, maybe a sweetened yogurt. I'd have to look into that a bit more. Oatmeal got a score of 209, meaning it had more than double the power of making you feel full than white bread. And jelly beans, what the? Jelly beans are 118. So now the researchers themselves said they were kind of surprised by this. Part of the reason this may be is that they said that some people were actually reported feeling kind of almost like nauseatingly sick after eating 240 calories of jelly beans. So they say that that might have been sort of an anomaly there. But we also know that many foods that in this study that actually rated very high were foods that were quite high in carbohydrate. In this case here, we have orange, ice cream, and steak. You can see the ice cream scored a 96, the orange a 202, and the steak at 176. So in this case, the steak was good. It was way better than white bread, but surprisingly, many people had thought the steak was going to come out first. The oranges actually made people feel fuller longer when given the same amount of calories. So that was pretty interesting. Croissant Croissant scored worse than any food in the index, so that just bear that in mind. A very highly processed food, high in fat and starch. Eggs scored 150, so that was better than white bread. But actually, eggs didn't score quite as high as oatmeal, surprisingly. And the food that scored higher than any other food in the entire index was the humble potato. Isn't that amazing? Now, the potato, this was just a plain boiled, cooled potato. It was not covered in butter. It was not deep fried. It wasn't a potato chip, but a potato. In fact, French fries, which were also analyzed in the study, scored very poorly. So, something about the potato and its power to satisfy baked potatoes, boiled potatoes, or even boiling and then cooling and cubing and making some baked home fries may be a great food to help you feel full in your meal plan. You can see a list of many of the most common foods in the satiety index, and you can see that blue bar shows essentially how high it rated compared to many other foods. So you can see the croissant, over here was very poor. Compare that over here to the potato, which rated higher than any other food in the index. But things like you can see here porridge. This was fish. Over here we have brown pasta. Over here we had wholemeal bread. Uh, I know there's a few of you I've seen on your nutrition logs that do some like high fiber whole grain breads that can be great. So yeah, interestingly, again, many of these high carbohydrate foods rated very high when they were in their whole food form, and the processed foods like cakes and donuts and Mars bars, you can see these things all rated very, very low. The foods that were above the black line, essentially the ones that are the best ones to really make as part of our diet when it comes to satiety. One last thing to note too here on this topic is when it comes to potatoes, many people seem to be afraid of eating potatoes, and they seem to think that they're going to cause weight gain. And I think that's kind of sad and unfortunate because one, not only is a potato a very nutritious food and very low in calories, but it is just I think been uh, really villainized for all the wrong reasons. One of the reasons that potatoes do tend to be associated with weight gain in some respects is because we've seen that in the US at least, that fresh potato consumption has dropped dramatically, all to be more than replaced by a huge jump in processed potato consumption. So people are not eating, baked potatoes, and subsisting on them like many people during, remember the Irish famine. The average potato consumption at that time when people actually were very fit and healthy was up to 8 large potatoes a day. That was a by one expert's analysis. Uh, and you can see that one boiled potato at 136 grams only has 119 calories in it. Whereas if you did the same number of grams of potato chips, that's 760 calories. So that's a huge, huge difference in calories there. And people are not eating, or gaining weight because they're eating a baked potato or a boiled potato. It's because their potatoes covered with sour cream and bacon bits and melted cheese and, are deep fried in oil that we're really getting into trouble. And those are the things that we have to watch out for. One other related thing you could look at that is on a similar vein to the satiety index is a group of researchers got together and put together a, um, a little scale they call the fullness factor for many common foods. And they give it a score of, 5 is like perfect. Like if you get a food that scores 5, it's like makes you feel super full and will help you, lose weight over time and help you to eat less throughout the day. Whereas foods that score really low, like a 0.5, let's say, like butter, I think it scored like a 0.5, is going to be a little bit more problematic. And you can see here the foods that rated very high. In this case, we have like bean sprouts with a 4.6, watermelon 4.5, grapefruit 4.0, carrots, oranges, fish, chicken, and so on. And at the bottom of the list, what do we see? Processed foods primarily, right? And these processed foods are what are causing people to overeat. So you could check that out too, fullness factor. All right, let's move on to story number 3 to wrap up our presentation for today, because I told you there were 3 tales. So we looked at tale number 1, how do you make an obese rat? Tale number 2, how do you make someone gain 5 pounds in 7 days? And now we're looking at story number 3, how do you eat so much that you actually lose weight? Yes, it's true. You can actually eat so much that you can lose weight. Now, in the past, what I used to like to do is I teach some group classes, and when I come into my classes, I sometimes bring in 2 bags of groceries, and I have them filled to the top. Well, I don't have them both filled. I have one filled to the top, and you could probably tell in my picture here. The green bag is kind of filled to the top with groceries, and the purple bag, it has just a few little items in it. And so what I do is I say, hey, imagine I had a bag diet, and I told you that every day you're going to show up here. You're going to pick a bag of groceries. You'll have 2 options, a purple bag or a green bag. You pick one of the 2 bags, take it home, and you can eat the entire contents of the bag, but you cannot eat anything else. So no cheating on the bag diet. You can only eat what's in the bag. Which bag would you choose? Many people in class will ask, not surprisingly, well, which bag's going to help me lose more weight? And I'll say, well, let's just kind of pretend that as long as you don't cheat on the diet, you don't eat anything else, that they're both pretty effective. They both will, essentially help you lose about the same amount of weight, but you just can't eat anything else. So which bag would you like, the green bag or the purple bag? Now, not surprisingly, people, when they come up to pick the 2 bags, they tend to say, well, wait a second. So you're saying I could eat this entire bag of groceries, this green bag, and I would lose the same amount of weight as this purple bag, which doesn't even look like it has anything in it? Well, then give me the green bag. So I said, okay, so let's go ahead. Before you make your decision, I want you to just grab a hold of the 2 bags. So they hold them and they're like, man, this green bag, it like sinks to the ground. And the purple bag, they're like, it doesn't even feel like you put anything in here. And I say, no, there is some stuff in there. Let's go ahead and look and see what I put in the 2 bags. So in the first bag, you can see that I entered all of it into the nutrition software that not only tracks how many calories, but it also tracks the vitamins and minerals and things like that, so we can assess its nutritional value. And you can see that this bag has, it only weighs about 1.2 pounds. So it's about the weight of a cell phone, and it is not very much food. But yet, you notice that it's at like 1,890 calories. That's like a ton of calories for just 1.2 pounds of food. But not only that, but if you look at these nutrition scores, it's really bad. The vitamins are low, the minerals are low. Some of the things are high, so like fat intake is a little too high. Not a very nutritious day. And yeah, I didn't even really put that much processed stuff in there. I had a couple protein, three protein bars, a couple slices of cheese, small handful of walnuts, and a small handful of apricots. And yet 1,890 calories. Imagine if I put Snickers bars and other kinds of things in there, processed foods, chips, and stuff like that. This probably would have been a lot worse. Now in bag number 2, 12-pound bag. So more than 10 times the weight of the first bag, and yet it has almost 100 calories less than the first bag. So wait a second. The first bag had only 1.2 pounds at 1,890 calories, and the second bag has 12 pounds with almost 100 calories less. How is that possible? Well, when you look at the foods I chose, things like apricots and wheat germ and plums and carrots and broccoli and apples and things like this, then all of a sudden it kind of makes sense because these are very low calorie dense foods. And this kind of concept or principle is something that we can apply in many other ways when it comes to setting up our own meal plans for the day. So let's look at, I know this seems impossible to many people. It's like, how can you eat 12 pounds of food and still have less calories than only 1.2 pounds of food? And in order to really understand this, we have to understand this concept, calorie density. I sometimes like to ask this question: how many calories does it take to fill 1 cup? Right now, if you answer this question correctly, then probably the appropriate answer would be, well, it depends on what you put in the cup, right? So, for example, if I were to put into a cup and I filled it to the top with spinach, I'd only have 7 calories. However, if I filled a cup with carrot, I'd have 45 calories. So a carrot is not very calorie dense, but it's about 5 times, or no, what is that? 7, yeah, 7, no, 5, 7 times 6 is 42. So a little more than 6 times the caloric density of spinach. If I went ahead and put apple in the same cup, I'd have only about 65 calories. If I did potato, 116 calories. So you can see potato has way more calories than spinach. But if I went ahead and I filled the cup with chicken, 335 calories. Whoa, so you mean chicken has almost 3 times as many calories as potato? That's surprising to many people. Cheese, 982 calories. And olive oil, 1,910 calories. Look at the difference there in calories in the same amount of space. 1,910 calories all the way down to 7 calories. Why is this important? Well, one of the reasons is because part of what makes us feel full, it's not the only reason, but part of it is how much food we can actually fit into our stomach and how much we can eat throughout the day. And you notice that people who eat very processed foods or refined foods, they just don't have very much food they can put in the stomach. We know that the volume that we can fill the stomach with will be a big part of how we feel full. In fact, this is how some, weight loss surgeries and things work, where they, will make the stomach smaller so that you feel fuller on less food. Or now they even have a surgical procedure. I would not recommend this, by the way, but they now have a surgical procedure where they actually put a balloon in someone's stomach. Then they fill the balloon with saline, like water, basically, and it takes up space in the stomach, making the volume of the stomach smaller. And this is their way of helping people lose weight, because now the stomach feels so full that when they go to eat their next meal, there's just not a lot of space there. We want to kind of use a similar process or phenomena when we eat food. We want to fill our stomach up with low calorie dense foods that are satisfying and nutritious. And you can see here that 400 calories of oil doesn't really take up much space in the stomach, whereas 400 calories of chicken takes up a bit more. But look at that when we mixed 400 calories of vegetables. Or what if we did, 300 calories of vegetables and then 100 calories from protein, right? That might be another option there where we could have a little bit of both, but really fill it up by volumizing the stomach. So we want to be thinking about, is a calorie when it comes to fullness and satiety? I mean, can you just say, well, I'm just going to eat less calories. I'm just going to eat, whatever I like, but just less of it. Well, yeah, you could technically, in theory, you could just eat less, but how likely are you to stick to that long term? If you're only eating processed foods, it's going to be difficult because, again, you're activating all of these things that mess with the brain and hormones and things that make it difficult to regulate the appetite. Not impossible for some people, but it'd be very difficult. We can see that, for example, here, look at the difference in volume. 1 pound of carrots has about the same amount of calories as just 1 ounce of nuts. Which one do you think would fill you up more? And then now don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying go out and eat a pound of carrots, but my point is we need to really kind of understand these differences. Let's look at some other examples here. You can see on the left these macadamia nuts at 461 calories has almost the exact same amount of calories, actually just a little bit fewer than this entire meal on the right hand side of we have some grilled salmon and veggies and sweet potato and egg. Here we have this beverage on the left with these 2 sandwiches at 1,470 calories compared to this entire day's worth of eating over here on the right. Which one do you think would fill you up more and make you feel more satisfied and less likely to overeat? This meal here on the left is at 1,870 calories. So you have a burger, fries, and a shake. Whereas over here we could have all this food. One big giant burrito and a Coca-Cola, 1,740 calories compared to all of this food over here. Now, this idea of volume is not a new concept. It's been around for a long time, and it's been really quite extensively researched and validated, particularly by this woman here, Barbara Rolls, Dr. Barbara Rolls from Pennsylvania State. She is a very world-renowned researcher on hunger and obesity and the factors that determine how much we eat. And she's coined this term volumetrics and actually written several books on this about how to lose weight safely, effectively, and permanently without feeling hungry and deprived. Now, one of the things that I thought was fascinating about Barbara's research is she made this observation that I don't think a lot of people have ever really thought about. And what she realized was that when you go to the zoo, you see these signs up everywhere that tell us about how much food these animals eat. So you look at the elephant cage or the giraffe or the rhino, because these zookeepers, they know that each animal needs a certain amount of food each day to kind of stay healthy and weight stable. And she got thinking about people and she was like, wait a second, do people eat about the same amount of food each day? I mean, people are all different sizes and stuff, but do they all like eat dramatically different, amounts of food? Like, are some people eating like 20 pounds of food in one day and others are eating like, 3 pounds of food, or what's the deal here? When she looked at animals that are very like us, very similar to us, for example, like the gorilla, she found the gorilla eats about an average about 30 to 45 pounds of food a day. That's a lot of food. And that's for that animal to stay weight stable. Whereas a chimpanzee, which is much smaller, eats about 10 to 18 pounds of food a day on average. So she said, well, what about people? So she did an experiment where she brought people of all different shapes and sizes and genders, and she had them locked in a metabolic ward. And then she said, I want you to just eat your food. But what I want you to do is we're going to weigh and measure everything, including any waste or anything you didn't eat, so we can factor and see, do human people or human subjects eat on average a certain amount of food every day? And if so, this could give us incredible insights as to what might be going on here. And lo and behold, what did she find? The average person eats about 3 to 5 pounds of food a day, regardless of their size. So think about that regardless if you're like a 6'1", athlete versus a tiny little ballerina, the average person is eating roughly 3 to 5 pounds of food a day. They're not eating 10 pounds, they're not eating 2 pounds, but somewhere around 3 to 5 pounds of food a day. Why is this important? Well, maybe this chart will help us to illustrate why this is so important. Remember that when we eat calories, that we have to eat a certain amount of calories in order to be at a healthy weight. And now this may vary from person to person, but generally speaking, it's going to be around, maybe 2,000, 2,500 calories for a male, maybe a little bit less than that for a female. Let's just use 2,000 though, just to use an example, even though some could be more, some could be less. And let's just think about what would happen if we ate our 3 to 5 pounds of food quota for the day, if we were eating certain kinds of foods. So, and we were eating those exclusively. So for example, here you can see in this green box here, I put all just kind of non-starchy vegetables. So we have like spinach, cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, carrots. And to the right of it is the calories per pound. So for example, if you ate 1 pound of spinach, you will have eaten 106 calories. If you ate 1 pound of cauliflower, 113 calories, and so on. Now, I put 5 of them in here so we could see how many calories would it be if I ate that upper limit. I ate 5 pounds of food from just non-starchy vegetables. How many calories would I have? Well, you can look down here at the bottom and see 676. Is that enough calories for me to have enough to eat for the day? Absolutely not. There's no way. I mean, like, you can see that if you try to live on vegetables alone, it just isn't going to happen. You're probably going to starve, because by the time you ate 5 pounds of food, your stomach would be so bloated and full, you just wouldn't want to eat anymore, and you still wouldn't have had enough calories. So one of the reasons we're always told to eat lots of veggies, part of it is simply because there's just so few calories in vegetables. They may just make, not to mention all their micronutrients, that they're just awesome for weight loss and health. What about fruit? Fruit, actually, believe it or not, many people tend to avoid fruit because they're like, oh, isn't there a lot of sugar in fruit? Well, believe it or not, there is a lot less calories in fruit than almost any other food, with the exception of vegetables. You can see that even if you choose things like pineapple and grapes, that there's only 306 calories per pound of grapes. Whereas compare that to something like chicken over here, 748 calories per pound. What about watermelon or pineapple? 227 calories per pound. Compare that to ham, 658 calories per pound. So fruits are very low in calories, and you can see that even if I ate 5 pounds of fruit by the end of the day, I still haven't consumed enough calories. 1,167. That's just not enough food to sustain me for very long. Now, if we move over to whole food starches, not the processed ones, but things like corn, peas, potatoes, oatmeal, butternut squash, and so on, you can see that these foods also rate very low. In fact, if I ate 5 pounds of starchy foods, whole starchy foods, I'm still only around 1,600 calories. Now we move into proteins, and you can see that when we're in the protein aisle, salmon at 944 calories per pound, that's quite high, higher than any of the others here because of its fat content. Ham, chicken, steak. Notice that whole egg is 708 calories per pound, but egg white is only 234 calories per pound, meaning the egg white has a caloric density that's almost like that of apple. So one of the reasons that we can reduce calories is just by simply reducing the fat portion of the food. So that's why we're always told or encouraged to have lean proteins. Those are going to have less calorie density. But notice that if I eat 5 pounds of this, 3,431 calories. Do you see what's starting to happen here? If I ate processed carbs like bagels, Cheerios, white bread, and so on, and I was just doing, uh, that kind of stuff throughout the day, 7,500 calories. Processed fats and sugar blends, these are the really processed foods. Look at this, 8,716 calories if I ate my quota. Even if I ate only 3 pounds of food, I'm still like in the 3 to 4,000 calorie mark. And look at processed fats, butters, cream cheese, pepperoni, things like that. or even some of the whole food fats here, you can see like nuts are quite high. We're at 13,685 calories. I mean, that's just insane, right? So you can see that these processed foods are just so high in calories that even when we're eating very small portions, we're still eating a lot of calories. And that's part of the reason that we have such a hard time sticking to them long term. Whereas these foods up here, so basically, if we're making our meals out of these things up here at the top 4 columns, we're going to be in pretty safe water as far as being able to eat quite a bit of food and not be overeating. Let's look at some just visual examples. How many bags of, or boxes, I should say, of spinach or spring mix do you need to eat in order to get the same number of calories as one bag of Doritos? And we're talking like the full bag, not the little tiny bag, but the full bag of Doritos. If you guessed 3 boxes of spring mix, you would be incorrect. Actually, it is closer to 23 boxes of spring mix in order to get the same number of calories as that one bag of Doritos. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not ever going to sit down and eat 23 boxes of spring mix. But I could easily polish off probably a whole bag or at least a half a bag of Doritos and not think twice about it, right? These processed foods are just super, super calorie dense. Look at this one here. One fat-free, sugar-free muffin at 720 calories is the same number of calories as if you were eating a whole 2-pound pineapple, half a cantaloupe, 2 pears, two whole grain rolls, grapes, papaya, kiwi, all that food here, same number of calories as that one fat-free, sugar-free muffin. Now imagine you went to the coffee shop and you grab that muffin, and along with it you grab a big iced coffee or something, and you don't realize that that one iced coffee and muffin was more calories in that single little snack than eating all of this food combined. You probably would eat this and then feel like you hadn't eaten anything at all an hour later, right? This, though, you're never going to eat in one setting. One fat-free Fig Newton cookie, same number of calories as entire cantaloupe. How many people do you know who ever eat one Fig Newton cookie? I mean, I remember when I used to eat these a lot, it would be like a whole sleeve or sometimes 2 or 3 sleeves, and I would tell myself, "Oh, but they got figs in them. They got to be healthy and it's fat-free." Problem is, I had, without realizing it, had jammed down so many calories. I would never sit down and eat 7 cantaloupes, right? Whole food, processed food. Here we can see French fry compared to corn on the cob. One medium fry, same number of calories as 4 ears of corn on the cob. This is without butter, by the way. Here we have 1/5 of a bacon cheeseburger, 210 calories, whereas this entire big giant veggie burger with onion and tomato, only 210 calories. Which one do you think would make you feel more full? Now, you could eat this. It's not that you have to have a veggie burger. The point is that when you're eating a very processed food, the calorie density is so high that the only way you can really be successful with weight loss on these things is we're back to kind of portion control. You got to have a smaller portion, which many people find to be equally difficult, if not more so. In fact, if you go back here for a sec, you can see that whole burger for that bacon cheeseburger, 1,010 calories for just one burger. 1/3 of a dry bagel, 140 calories compared to this whole meal down here with the pickle. This one sausage link, same number of calories as 32 large dill pickles. 1 cup of cashews, same number of calories as 8 baked potatoes with salsa. This one sandwich here, same number of calories as this sandwich plus a bowl of fruit plus a bowl of soup. How's that possible? Well, all they did was they swapped out the fatty meat and substituted in a low-fat veggie alternative, and were able to add a bowl of fruit and a bowl of soup and keep the calories almost exactly identical. Now, think about this, that this is the way we go about losing weight. This is where we eat so much that we can't help but lose weight. This over here, portion control, is why a lot of people really struggle when they just try to eat smaller portions. There are many other examples that we could look at, but the point is that which would you choose? Which way of eating would you choose that would be the way of eating that you feel would help you to lose weight without feeling like it's a constant struggle, a constant battle? This over here, where you have little tiny dinky portions and you just eat less, or this over here where you eat giant portions of the right quality food and you have almost effortless weight loss. Now, the idea behind this, Barbara kind of really pointed out, is that when we want to try to increase the volume of food, there are a few principles we need to follow. We need to increase the protein content, decrease the fat content, decrease the sugar content, and increase the water content. Right now, I'm going to show you an example of how I did this in this meal. So over here, we have a standard peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a 1 glass of milk at 663 calories and 29 grams of fat. That's with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, 2 tablespoons of jam, and a full glass of milk. Over here, we have 2 sandwiches and 3 glasses of milk at only 481 calories and only 14 grams of fat. So I have twice as much food and way less calories. How is that possible? Well, I'm going to use the volumetrics principle. Number one, reduce the sugar. How did I reduce the sugar? I took away the jam and I substituted fresh berries instead of jam. Next, I'm going to reduce the fat. How did I reduce the fat? I took full fat peanut butter, and instead over here I used the powdered peanut butter. I just added a little almond milk to it to whisk it up till it was creamy, spread it on my sandwiches, and I was able to reduce the fat content. Number three, increase the protein content. I chose a high protein bread versus the standard white bread. And I also was able to use a higher protein peanut butter because when I reduced the fat content over here, by using this powdered peanut butter, the protein concentration was much greater. I also reduced the fat content and increased the water by reducing the whole fat milk down to an unsweetened almond milk at only 35 calories a glass instead of 90 calories a glass. And as a result, by increasing the quality of the meal, I'm able to eat considerably more calories, considerably more food while consuming fewer calories at the same time. When this same principle we use when it comes to exercise, higher quality exercise, weight training, and higher intensities tends to equate to greater, results. Kind of a similar principle that we won't really touch on right now. So the idea here is that instead of doing portion control, like many people think is the way to lose weight, it's not to say that we don't want to watch our portions. It's just that it's difficult to sustain when you're like, well, I'm just going to have one little tiny sliver of chocolate cake. You can do that. And if you have the self-control to do that, well, then all the more, praise for you. But ideally what we want to do is we want to increase the volume of our meal by choosing things that are more natural, whole foods that allow us to eat way more food and fewer calories at the same time. All right. By the way, this is a little calorie density chart. We're about time to wrap up here. This is a little calorie density chart showing us how these foods rate. Roughly, foods that are higher than 600 calories per pound are the ones we have to really be careful of. These are the ones that are super easy to overeat, and you can see them down here. And foods that are lower than 600 calories per pound, you can see like beans, whole grains, potatoes, fruits, vegetables. These are the ones that we can eat liberally and are going to be loaded with those micronutrients. So to summarize and wrap it up here, just to finish up, remember that we want to eat foods that rate low in addiction as our main weight loss foods. Check out the volumetrics books by Barbara Rolls because those are going to give you some great ideas for recipes and substitutions. Check out the research on the satiety index and don't be afraid of potatoes. And then lastly, eat high micronutrient dense foods to help lower inflammation. Remember, these are the foods that are like those dark leafy green vegetables and fruits, things like that. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of your coaches, and they can give you some more insights there. And I hope you guys have it looks like it's time to end our call. So I just hope you guys have a great night.